The Stranger, Time of Tempests, Year 3. Whether it was magic or science or magical science that powered the place, the wind had done it in. And not just the wind. You could feel it in the air. That horrible and tinny electrical buzz that predicated the distant roar of thunder. It wasn't a bad turn of events, all things considered. She had been watching their host avidly, and it hadn't taken a bad judge of character to see how uncomfortable Ruslana was getting as time wore on. Not that she could say why, exactly, but then again, Koza didn't really care as to the reasons. Being a good guest was being good to the host. And now that the power was shot. Tapping her foot against the table a few times to get everyone's attention. No easy feat. Koza wore a broad grin as she flicked her lighter, which promptly died from whatever was killing the light outside. Well, that was a disappointment.
Okay, so. I've got just the thing for moments like this. Gather around if you're interested, or even only slightly interested. And if you're feeling brave, prepare your mind and soul for the idea of scary stories told in the complete and gloaming darkness.
A few disgruntled mumbles went up, and she was glad her night vision was hardly good enough, nor hearing distinct enough, to identify who, precisely, was grumbling. Thankfully, however.
Oh, well. I'll try my hand at it.
Bones was an accommodating sort, shambling over ponderously, already lost in thought and recollection. Finally, he gave a quiet chuckle, skull moving jerkily in the darkness, and the effect being mildly eerie even with his overwhelmingly friendly demeanor. Though it was only herself, Binky, and Boleslava listening at the moment, Bones swept his arm out dramatically.
Once, not so long ago, there were people living in this very land, even on this very spot. Theirs was a truly wonderful place, a metropolitan where life was good, and folk listened to one another with glad hearts and careful ears.
A few of the mingling demons had migrated over, too, and already the strange electric energy of amateur storytelling had started to replace the peculiar electrical buzz from before.
Of course, time can be cruel as well as fair, and as all things change, so too do they fall. But that is not what we're here to listen to tonight. For beneath the earth itself, there was something they buried, so precious and profane that.
Bones' words drew to a creaking halt, tone faltering.
Oh no, I can't remember why, but you'll have to take my word for it. It was a terrifying thing. The idea itself linked the entirety of the city as its people fled, but in the end, that link also proved to do something terrible. Darn.
Disappointed, several of the assembled had started to drift away, when Binky leapt to his feet.
Okay. Binky'll go.
His one eye shut in deep thought. A strange, nervous energy began to build up as eyes began to grow accustomed to the dark, for even though he was a gentle soul, there was a focus to Binky that seemed incredibly serious, as if he was moments away from the most terrifying story to be told in a darkened room as a gale raged. Then, Binky's eye opened, and he shrugged apologetically.
Binky is sorry. All Binky's stories are too scary. Don't want to scare anyone. Very well. I suppose I shall give it a try.
The screaming of serpents and guests, though not Boleslava, who seemed only annoyed, possibly because Grendolf's appearance, accidentally, knocked her card castle apart, accompanied the ancient lich as he appeared, hand placed thoughtfully under his skull.
Once, not so long ago, there was a precious thing. It was kept and cherished by all who held it, but had no name. For to name it would have been to strip it of its power to uplift the heart and protect the senses.
Perhaps it was the vague description, but she could just make out Zambi's nervous laughter. Grendolf continued, undaunted and unconcerned.
So this thing, this regard, it filled the lives of those who felt it with purpose and hope. But there was one who could not feel it, and rather than live alone with the lack of it, or strive to learn the nature of it, they grew bitter, and deigned to murder the thing, such that none could ever feel it, ever again.
The audience grew silent, for perhaps some had heard this manner of tale before.
But you cannot murder a symbol nor a feeling so easily, not without destroying all who feel or embody it.
Grendolf was hunched over his staff as, for a second, there was light. Far outside, the crackling and distant roar of thunder predicated unbelievably close lightning, or something like it. The pale blue glow that illuminated the room cast shadows off nervous faces that played across the walls, and then vanished as light from above vanished, too.
And so that is what they did. Finally, they had done it. All who had felt the thing were gone, the memories of it vandalized and erased, and all symbols of it banished and broken. Save, of course, for they who had sought to destroy it in the first place. For they had known it the entire time.
Grendolf took several steps towards the wall and looked up at the ceiling, saying nothing more.
But you all know the rest. As you laughed, you go.
From across the room, Zemby gave an odd half-gasp half-roar of challenge, and managed to fall back into a convenient seat. Her foot tapped against the ground as the room watched and listened silently and expectantly.
All right. I've got this.
Humming quietly to herself, Zemby tapped her feet in time to some rhythm only she could hear. Then,
once, not so long ago, there was the time of monsters. Not monsters like you or me, or monsters like your ordinary, run-of-the-mill jerk.
Quiet laughter started up, a little nervously, at first, but her face was entirely seriously, and the laughter, already nervous and slightly manic to begin with, soon died down.
This was the time of monsters. When roots ate soil, and spat up bones. When the sky was red, and the clouds had turned black, and the sky didn't shiver but twisted in the sky above. So, one day, or night, because the two bled together until you could not tell which had come first, for it was impossible to sleep no matter how tired you grew. One day, someone decided that the only way they could end the time of monsters was to kill the person who had brought it into being in the first place. And so, they did. And it was a brutal and bloody thing, but all it did was extend the age, and the ground grew watery and red.
Zemby took a deep breath and got up out of her chair.
That's all. Next story.
Chow and Bones stood up in disjointed and awkward unity, quietly talking to their friend as she paced nervously. The stranger watched from her seat, eyebrow raised but pretty content. She enjoyed a good story as much as anyone else, after all.
I'll go,
Boleslava announced with a sudden, strange vigor. Without time to pause, she launched into her story.
Once, not so long ago, people were bound by the worst possible action they'd ever take. They'd keep all their darkness locked up inside them until they were eaten away by it, day by day. Eventually there was nothing left to eat, only sadness and hatred. But that's not a very happy story, is it?
Puffing herself up, Boleslava floated a little off the ground, and it was adorable enough to diffuse some of the strange tension that had built up in the dark, enclosed, smoggy room.
Eventually, people found out how to take away that darkness bit by bit, and it wasn't a happy ending, but it wasn't an ending either.
She looked as if she had something else to add, but Paul cut her off.
That's not even scary. Here, you all have been depleting my stock, and once again, I'm at the mercy of cruel factors expropriating said stock, so at least have the mercy to let a professional try.
Adjusting his glasses, which looked odd and slightly distorted in the inky dark, Paul began.
Once, not so long ago, there lived people by the sea, some of them who were even costume enthusiasts like you lot.
None bothered to correct him, for some battles were utterly unwinnable.
These people lived, and died, by the sea. They were so indebted to it that they had a ceremony where they would throw a ring into the water and declare their ruler to be wed to it. And if their ruler did poorly, into the drink they went.
The wind had died down outside, though not the storm. Chunks of hail, not quite as large as the blocks of ice thrown through the air in the months of howling but nevertheless impressive, rained down upon the ground above.
But eventually, they started running out of rulers. Because, see, the rulers didn't die, down there. Nah. They got pruny and dehydrated and all stretched out, but they didn't die. And eventually they floated back to shore, and pulled themselves onto dry land. And with water and barnacles in their gullets, they tried to take back their land.
Smiling as if proud of himself, Paul leaned back against the wall,
One day, there was only one person left, and they threw themselves into the sea. And then there was nobody left all. But if you hear the sound of waves upon the shore and listen closely, you can still hear them wailing, softly.
A large hailstone thud against the ceiling, causing a few to jump, Paul included.
Wow, that one had force to it. Can't take full credit for my story, there, I think I read something like that in a magazine anthology, aha. Anyone else, wanna?
Suddenly, as the hailstones had fallen, and as fierce as the sound they had made, Ruslana's rifle stock slamming into the floor seemed to dispel the room. Her voice was a low growl as she spoke, both confused and somewhat unnerved, though it was hidden behind a layer of steel.
Can't say I like this game. How about we stop all the idle talk for a while, and wait things out? It's weird that both the generator and both sources of power are out at the moment, but that's just how things roll.
Stretching, Koza rose to her feet. The air felt good. Electric, even.
I hadn't meant to get everyone so on edge, mind if I finish things off, then?
The room hung quietly, and it was at this point that the demons still present, sensitive to this sort of thing, quietly began to step between reality and leave only the faint smell of sulphurous stone.
Go for it, and then let the matter drop. All right.
Koza chuckled heartily, rubbing her hands together.
Promise.
Thunder roared, but this time, no abnormally quick lightning rushed to its defense, and the bunker room seemed lost in time and cast off from the natural world.
Once, not so long ago, there was a land that had been torn apart by war. It had been ruined beyond all salvation, and even the soil burned, but it was home, and whatever that meant, it was the place that a few lonely castaways dreamt of when they closed their eyes, even if their memory wasn't so good.
The room was dead silent.
Having made half the journey back, it seemed an ideal time to celebrate, and the celebrations were good. But one of the castaways got to thinking, maybe it'd be easier to set up a new home in the new land they had found themselves. And it'd be exactly like the old home, only a bit better. Less people, more servants, more order.
The stranger, expression guarded, continued.
Whichever castaway this was, they seemed intent on fighting another one of the castaways, so they kept on fighting, again and again. And maybe there was nothing meant by it, maybe it was the nature of things. But it never accomplished anything, and around them the land grew bitter and ashen and the skies thick with smog, and the world died until it was just like the one they had left.
Clearly, she wanted to say more. But then, perhaps mercifully, with one last wheezing clarion of light from above, the lights below returned.
Guess I'm saying that it's probably for the best to let bygones be bygones, and not chasing after people is always a sound plan. Couldn't stop anyone if that's what they believed they had to do. But even putting aside that it's a badly told story, maybe there's something to it, you know.
Ruslana stared her down with the practiced neutrality that only soldiers and gamblers knew. But Koza didn't stare back, only shrugged and gave a weak smile.
Well, that's me out, I think. Boleslava, Binky, last chance if you don't want to follow me around.
Boleslava float hopped onto Koza's shoulder, but...
Sorry. Binky think more useful here. That? Okay.
Chortling, the stranger gave a wide shrug and a smile.
Well, naturally. I'm not going anywhere too far. Just wandering wherever my feet take me, which'll probably be back here at points to get my bearings, of course. So long as I'm welcome, here, that is.
Ruslana seemed to weigh her options carefully, and gave a curt nod. Beaming, Koza gave Binky as big a hug as she could, which still wasn't very impressive, but it was an effort, and then waved to everyone else, before pulling herself up and out into the still tumultuous storm, whistling to herself. The atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Ruslana was staring at the floor with a hard-set, uncompromising frown. Paul knew a dangerous frown when he saw it, and had left politely, but hurriedly. Zhao, Zembi, and Bones left soon after, their farewells falling on near-deaf ears, and only meeting with the slightest and most terse of farewells from Ruslana herself. Binky excused himself to do the thankless job of helping the boulder folk undredge buildings from the ground, leaving
You can go at any time, you know. Isn't much point here.
Pinching the bridge her nose and massaging under her eyes, Ruslana tried to remember how to smile, but nothing came. She looked around for Grendolf, but the lich, of course, was gone. So it was and so it goes, hey? Lorelei said nothing, or at least nothing quickly enough.
Hey. I said you can go. I wouldn't mind some time, think things through a little.
Eyes half shut and askance, Lorelei shook her head.
I'm not going.
Ruslana wanted to yell or to feel some kind of emotion, but there wasn't much left to feel. Just exhaustion. Forcing herself to look up at the witch, she tried to see what could possibly have motivated the change in temperament, and finding none, felt anger and resentment and self-loathing looming just out of reach, mocking her, but providing not even vitriol to navigate by.
Why?
She finally managed to ask, and when she did, it was like a linchpin had been removed and she stumbled into a seat, head in her hands.
Go, please. I know your logic, and I'm not faulting it. Hell, it must be more sound than mine, given things. I'm just, could use some time to recharge.
But Lorelei did not go, and she placed her hands around Ruslana's shoulders and still did not go. Even when quiet, she had that gentle strength Ruslana did not understand to her. And yet, even though it was very frightening in its way.
I'm not going anywhere. Maybe it's because I know what you're feeling, or maybe it's because I'm a witch, and I think witches meddle. But right now, I think you need a friend, and I think you have some great friends, but sometimes it's hard to appreciate old friends without the help of a new one. Oh, geez. I've gotta go think Binky. I really did need his help, and...
Ruslana stopped, halfway to her feet, shoulders still slightly warm. Turning in place, she faced Lorelei with the most serious expression she could manage, marred in its seriousness only by her slight, well-hidden smile.
Guess I should thank you, too, hey? Thank you, Miss Witch. Even if you go do witchy things, later, I well, and truly, appreciate it. I hope I can be as good a friend to you. But now, I gotta go thank my old friends. So, if you'll excuse me, I'll look forward to actually having that conversation when I get back.
Lorelei smiled until Ruslana was gone, then stifled a yawn. The two said nothing to one another, then Grendolf gave a curt nod of his skull.
Perhaps that shall do, for now. I imagine there is an empty room in Tunnel 38. I could help guide you there, if you are still learning to move. Thanks. I'd like that.
Lorelei replied, and the two left, leaving only the empty, but not unpleasant remnants of the tunnel behind them as the storm raged as it pleased above, only the distant roar of what had been mistaken for thunder, or perhaps lightning, hinting at the visitor that had passed by in a futile quest for an enemy that he could not find. Chapter end.